Okay, so today I want to talk about the future of brand growth. And as we all know in this room, this isn't about just chasing followers or like fleeting friends. This is about something more deep, and this is advocacy. And this is the kind of growth that happens when your customers become your champions. They're recommending you, they're defending you, and they're telling your friends about you. But the problem that we've had, along with words like authenticity, which I will say at some point, but I actually genuinely mean it, community and advocacy have also become buzzwords and they've lost their meaning. But in reality, when they are done right, they are not just ideas, they're strategies that drive long-term success. Now, I've only got 10 minutes, less than now, which is kind of like panic-inducing because I could talk about this for hours. But I am going to talk about how community is driving brand advocacy in 2025 and also the 3 trends that are helping brands turn their customers into the most loyal advocates. So as you know, I'm Verity, head of content and category at brand advocacy platform Duel, but I'm also the co-host of the Building Brand Advocacy Podcast. So if you want to get your phones out, type that into Spotify and start following. I'd really appreciate it. My boss is, there. That would really help a girl in marketing out with her KPIs. So we interview some of the greatest minds from some of the world's hottest brands, from like your brand builders, your CMOs, your founders, industry experts, and the platforms themselves. And if Pinterest is still in the room, we'd love to talk to you. And yeah, we dig into conversations about like modern day brand building. So brand advocacy, like I said, is when your customers aren't just your buyers, they're champions, again, recommending you, defending you, but they're actively engaging others on your behalf. I think this is a great quote from one of our recent episodes with Holly from Brand Papier, who explains it really well. And this is why I think brand advocacy should become your next obsession. But advocacy isn't new. You'll know that brands like Patagonia, Lululemon, Gymshark, they've been doing it for years. And so they've been like living by these tried and trusted methods. But what we do have today is new trends that are emerging that amplify them in really powerful ways. And you'll know that some brands today are doing it, like Refi. They're the most talked about brand on my LinkedIn profile. Everyone is talking about them. There's still a lot of brands out there, though, that are really chasing those short-term hacks. So where we are today, over the past decade, social media has completely revolutionised the way that we connect, consume and communicate. And social commerce has also reshaped how we shop, discover and engage. It's made every single one of us in this room creators. We all have our own circles of influence and it's given brands unprecedented reach. But the landscape that we're in, as you can see, like traditional engagement has massively dropped. So like Facebook's engagement is down by 80%, TikTok is halved, and Instagram's engagement rate is just 0.43%. And I think this shows that we are just burnt out by scrolling. We've talked about doom scrolling today, but also these transactional spaces. And again, if we look at TikTok, 97% of TikTok views are passive, and 67% of users on TikTok never post, which I think shows that we're consuming more and more, but we're actually connecting less and less. And I think this disengagement is really driving us to a decentralized, community-led world where public feeds are giving way to these private spaces. And if we look at some of the platforms, like, let's just take like broadcast channels, for example, like these new features and updates that are happening, they're not just there to like bamboozle your social media teams and like, what the hell is this? They're actually there because it's a direct correlation to consumer behavior on the platforms. And again, Discord, their groups have grown like 247% in 2024, and 78% of users on social media say they do prefer private communities over public feed. So this is where advocacy comes in, because it's no longer about like passive consumption. We want experiences, we want intimate spaces, and we want to co-create. We want to advocate with brands and not just for them. And this brings me on to the 3 trends. So the first one is around the creator ecosystem. And again, we've kind of like touched on it today. Brands need to start thinking of creators as not just like external collaborators, but as kind of like embedded partners in the whole kind of like marketing mix. And this rise of the ecosystem shows that creators are kind of like shaping what brands stand for. They're kind of like telling them what they need to put out into the world. And it's beyond influencer like transactional deals, because today's creators are co-designing, they're crafting stories, and they're kind of like, they're the ones building the experiences in the niche communities. And this also shows that the influencer model has changed as well, because we're not just relying on a few mega influencers now. Like I said, you're all creators, you've got your customers, you've got your employees, you've got nanos, micros. Those are the guys that are kind of like, they deliver something that the mega influencers have never been able to do, which is reliability. And I'm going to say it, authenticity. But they're also the kind of like connection, like I said, to those direct communities out there. And these guys are like they play such a critical part in the like marketing mix here. So like I said, this is all about not just working with creators, but like, co-creating with them. And again, I think that word was mentioned before, and I think that's really critical here. And this is where you're going to foster the trust and the collaboration. Now, the second one is designed connections, which I think is my favorite one. I've been talking about this a lot. TikTok themselves said in their trend report that their trends peak in just 3 to 5 days. So if you think about like jumping on a trend like Brat Summer, you remember it, you can visualize Brat Summer, right? But can you remember any of the brands that took part in it? And when you think about like the time and resource and energy that goes into it, it's probably not worth it. So for me, design connections is around intentional, memorable experiences that build that emotional bond. And I've broken it down into 2 parts. The first one is that kind of like silent, not so silent customer campaigns, where brands are kind of like working to create their own memorable moments, and the stories around it that evolve create organic viral moments for the brands themselves. So we talked about Stanley this morning, so can push that aside because that was a bit of a negative comment about Stanley. But if you remember, anyone remember the customer's car that was set on fire? All those pictures and the Stanley Cup was the only thing remaining. And then Stanley bought that customer a car. That was all over social media. North Face, I don't know if anyone remembers the girl on the hike complaining on TikTok about the jacket. They got a helicopter, flew out a new product to her. Those are the stories that we're going to remember, and those are the brands that we're going to remember. The second part of it is in real life to URL experiences, because we want real world engagement that we can talk about online. And it's kind of like that's the perfect balance of in-person connection and that digital amplification. And Rode is another great example of how they're kind of using offline content and storytelling to the online world. It's so simple. They kind of just produce these oversized, overproportioned products that creates a visual hook and creates attention. And that is how we blend physical events with online storytelling. And it's that kind of content that we want. We want it to be entertaining. We want it to educate and inform rather than over promoting ourselves as a brand. And that's what will help us work towards the lifestyle-driven stories that fit into our advocates' lives. And then the last one is the off-the-grid communities, because as I said, all those stats before show that we really are in the age of the lurker. And these niche communities are emerging as like the secret weapon for brands looking to create meaningful connections. So people are retreating to the hyper-targeted online spaces. So you've got your Discords, you've got your broadcast channels, you've got Reddit, sort of all these spaces, Substacks are coming up. And, even your own advocacy programs. This is where people want to go to connect over shared passions, values and interests. And these off-the-grid communities are providing such a quieter, more focused environment that really fosters that deeper engagement. And they're really powerful because that high engagement with precise targeting is so different to your social audiences, because they're actually participating, they're actually consuming that content. And I think the brands that can position themselves in these niche and sort of like private spaces become the authorities, and they're the ones that build genuine relationships and drive the higher conversions. Now, I know what I've just said, and even thinking about advocacy is something that takes a long time. It's not just something that you can switch on for overnight success. But advocacy is definitely more than a feel-good idea. I'm going to say the word, it is measurable. Mic drop, because I think this is something that you could even take to your CFO. We have been analysing, my team have been analysing the top 39 publicly fashion and beauty brands. We've been analysing their approach to advocacy and some of the trends that I've just been talking about. And what we found was really clear that if brands prioritise and invest in advocacy, this doesn't just build a loyal fan base, it builds a long-term sustainable revenue growth. So if you want to chat to me about that and find out a bit more about your brand advocacy score, I will be at the bar, hopefully with a gin and tonic after this. But you can also find me on LinkedIn at Verity Hurd. And like I said, please follow the podcast. Thank you very much.